this session. So Abhijit, you just go ahead and start the session.
Yes. So thank you, sir.
Abhijit is from Kolhapur. He's a glaucoma expert and he's a moderator of this session.
Yes. Thank you. It's a great honor to be with all of you glaucoma stalwarts on this session. And coincidentally, this hall is named after Dr. Albal. Dr. Albal, he was my PG teacher. So I'm very grateful that his name is there and all my teachers, you are here on the dais. So first of all, I will welcome you all. And we will start this session with Dr. Mayur ma'am's talk. She is a known figure in glaucoma in India, Asia, and throughout the world. She has very vast experience in glaucoma and she is working in a lot of institutions and now she is based in Ahmedabad. So I will ask Mayur ma'am to give a talk on management of advanced glaucomas. Sorry, stop the leak.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for the good introduction. I will start with my talk, managing a leaking or the overhanging blab. I have made this talk in the 4 cases format of only practical tip, how I manage these cases in my clinic. The young male who had a primary open-angle glaucoma was on the 2 drugs in right eye and left eye, recently had trabeculectomy and with mitomycin done. Day 1, the vision was 6/9 with glasses. 7 millimeter of mercury was intraocular pressure, well-formed blab, and everything was okay. We were happy, patient was happy. On 4th day, he came for the follow-up with the discomfort and the blurring of the vision. Vision was 6/9 and the intraocular pressure was 8 millimeter of mercury. The slit lamp had pigment dusting on the endothelial cell and the chamber depth was normal, but there was a flare and 1+ cell. The blab was diffuse, non-elevated blab, and the wound was well sealed. So what is there in this patient? This is the photograph. If you can look at, we did the Seidel test and there was a small leak in that particular area. Now this is a small pinhole type of small leaking area of the conjunctiva, very small hole which was lying on the top of the trabeculectomy incisional site. And it was about 3 millimeter away from the limbus. And the B scan was normal, posterior segment, no choroidal detachment was detected in this patient. Now, these are the options available. Either you control the inflammation and observe, you may patch the eye or place the bandage contact lens or other things or repairing. But repairing can be done in such a small hole with the tissue glue. Suturing is not advisable. So what we did, we placed the large size BCL on this, which covered the hole very well. And we continue with the steroid topical, moxifloxacin and cyclopentolate drops. And next day, there was no flare and no cells. And after 3 days, you see the healing buttonhole, very small size, smaller than what it was. Chamber was quite. And on 5th day, it disappeared. There was no hole and no leakage. So with this small, even with the BCL also, if the hole is near the limbus and very small, you can do the conservative management in such scenarios. The second case is the young myope patient who also had a steroid-induced glaucoma on maximum therapy, had a trabeculectomy with mitomycin done, EW, and came to us for the post-operative hypotony. 2 millimeter of mercury was the pressure in this patient, and you can see this very, very shallow chamber, kissing choroidal, almost kissing choroidal. So what we planned to place a tight compression suture in this particular patient who had an overfiltering blab. And this is how on day 1, the compression suture compressed the overfiltering blab. And this is the post-op. After 3 months, you can see the compression suture and almost diffuse elevated blab. Now, it's a very small clip of another patient, how to take. Either you can take the compression suture horizontal or you can take the vertical suture with nylon suture. The first big bite is taken in the partial thickness cornea and make a cross superiorly in the peripheral part of the bleb and make a tight compression suture and then bury this knot by rotating it. This is how it can be done. So another case is overhanging bleb. It is well documented complication. This is a very good bleb, but this is something which you do not want to have, overhanging and dissecting on the cornea. And this is more commonly seen with the full thickness filtering procedure, though it is rare these days. And it is more common because of the mitomycin use. And it creates the hypotony, sometimes foreign body sensation because of the very large size, and then Dallon formation due to corneal drying in that area near the limbus, astigmatism and pain and dysesthesia. So these patients may need to do something. And what are those signs? Large bleb gradually extending downwards on the cornea and covers the peripheral part. And there is a Dallon formation. So initially, if it is not that big, you can do the conservative management. Lubrication, artificial tears, and aqueous suppression may be used. Shrinking procedures can be done using the laser or the cryo application or the acid application. Chloroacetic acid application can be done. And when will you like to do the surgical revision of such big blebs? Particularly in advanced cases of glaucoma or patient who had intractable pain because of the Dallon and the vision is fluctuating because of the this big bleb. In that case, either you can do the partial excision of the overhanging corneal portion also, or the bleb excision with the free conjunctival autograft, patch graft, or bleb excision with the conjunctival advancement. But one should remember that all these procedures you may do may compromise the bleb's function, and patients should understand that they might need future medication, anti-glaucoma medication, or surgical intervention for the IOP control. This is to show how the partial dissection is done. Should I stop or 1 minute is still there?
No, ma'am, you continue. Continue, ma'am. You have 2 more minutes.
So use the spatula.
You have a time. You have a time. Go ahead.
Okay, so use the spatula or blade, just elevate. This is just the opposition. It's not the totally going into the cornea. So very easy to lift this part of the bleb over the cornea, and then with this scissor, you can snip it off, the extra conjunctiva that is there. So this is the last case. The late onset thin cystic bleb came to us with the fluctuating vision, high myop, and he had both eye cataract surgery also done beforehand. And very soft eye. The OCT also showed the small thin area of the leakage, and it was not possible to suture just like that. So we did the conjunctival advancement with the hooding, and this is the 3 months post-op. Never do the early suture removal. Here what happened, we did remove one suture here. It was giving patient foreign body sensation, and there is a retraction of the conjunctiva. So keep the suture all buried. Try to do that, and don't remove at least 3 months. Keep it there. So this is a small clip. First identify and then remove the conjunctiva from the marginal area. Separate it out, the bleb. And if conjunctiva is not enough for the advancement, then give 2 side snip that will allow this conjunctiva. And now, once you see that you can have enough conjunctiva, make a debridement of the cornea in the limbal area. Otherwise, the conjunctiva will retract. And then the suturing is done with the cornea and conjunctiva, either in the running fashion, or you can have it how it looks at the end of the session. Now the case where you late onset leak, this is the cystic leaky bleb, but you can see the 2 holes here, appears to be scleral melt. So what you should do in this, you can take the donor sclera and put a patch graft on that. First, remove the bad unhealthy conjunctiva in this part and cover it with the scleral patch graft and suture it with the 10-0 or 9-0 and cover the conjunctiva. So these are some of the small tips that you can use where that hole is and how good is the bleb or the conjunctiva in the surrounding and what is available to you, you can do this. But remember that bleb function is compromised. So preoperative counseling is essential in all these patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam.
Can we introduce the second speaker?
Yes, if anybody has questions, Pradeep sir, if anybody wants to ask any questions to Dr. Mayuri.
Yes, Abhijit. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayuri. And the next speaker is Sushmita. I think that Sushmita is just joining. Sushmita, have you joined?
Hi, Mayuri. It was an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Mehta.
All cases were covered very nicely.
So, Abhijit.
So, Dr. Sushmita, welcome to our MOS, Maratha Film Society. Actually, she was busy in other conference. And just as a token of introduction, nobody needs introduction to Dr. Sushmita, madam. And for us, she was like an idol when we were studying or in our formative years. You were like an idol to all of us.
Wow.
So you are doing a great work in the PG Institute, and we all attend your sessions in GSI and other societies. So
thank you so much.
I know you are busy, so we'll start with your talk immediately.
Can you see my screens? I am not able to.
Yes, ma'am.
Share
Yes, it's visible, ma'am.
It's visible. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's visible, ma'am.
That's better. Right. Thank you so much for that kind invite, and thank you for accommodating me now, because I think the Bihar session was running late. And we're also felicitating Professor Jagatram, who superannuates today. So it's been a nice packed day for us all, actually. So I'd be talking on surgical pearls and pseudoexfoliation glaucoma. We all know that it's an age-related progressive systemic disorder characterized by elastotic degeneration. And what we need to remember that it's a cerebrovascular and cardiovascular disease as well. The ocular significance is that you can see this microfibrillary material mainly on the lens and pupillary margin. But for us, what's important is that it's associated with glaucoma in 50%, which is mainly open angle. But remember, angle closure is not infrequent. So there are lax zonules. There might be a forward lens iris diaphragm shifting. You might have an inherently narrow anterior segment since we are so prone to angle closure. And it can often be diagnosed as an intractable PACG as well. But careful examination shows up the cause. So this is somebody who's had a laser iridotomy as PACG, rapidly progressing. So if you look really carefully, you'll be able to pick up this pseudoexfoliative material on the pupillary margin. Why is it problematic? Because it has higher mean intraocular pressure levels. The IOP fluctuates frequently, and there can be high spikes. Also, for us, it's rapid disease progression because of elastosis of the lamina tuberosa. So it's more elastic and prone to more damage with fluctuations in the intraocular pressure. And the independent risk factor for progression is pseudoexfoliation with ocular hypertension. Always treat. So if you have an OHT patient, even if you think that the disc looks normal today, remember it's at higher risk for progression to glaucoma. So the role of surgery, of course, is trabeculectomy with MMC. That's our main workhorse. It's frequently required due to advanced disease or progression by the time the patients present to us. There are special problems, intraoperative because of vitreous loss, inherent weak zonules, and postoperatively, we have increased inflammation. Cataract surgery is often beneficial in moderate disease, so we tend to do cataract earlier, but intraoperative, again, you would have zonular weakness, poor pupillary dilatation, and postoperatively, you could have intraocular pressure spikes. And remember, when the patients come to us, you might often require a phaco trab as in this patient. So I'll just quickly run through videos for surgical tips for a phaco trab and pseudoexfoliation. It's always better to have separate sites to minimize inflammation as much as possible. Through one side, you've made the flap already, a large CCC to avoid capsular phimosis. So this is a fairly large CCC that's been done. And then stay in the center because you avoid going to the periphery to the zonules. So a direct chop is always better. Use a low bottle height, low aspiration. It's better to be slow. There's no hurry. So just a slow phaco. And I always use a 3-piece IOL with rigid haptics. Sometimes if the zonules are a little lax, we also tend to do a capture on table itself. So once the IOL is in and we go in and complete the trabeculectomy after instilling pilocarpine. So the trabeculectomy is done. And then a large conjunctival flap, which covers both the phaco-incision as well as the trabeculectomy. So this is our usual surgical steps for a phaco trap whenever we have pseudo-exfoliation. For instance, let's see a case. There's the 64-year-old woman, 618 and 66 vision, 28 and 20 millimeters of mercury on 3 drugs, very thin conjunctiva. Now, this is something that you need to look for, probably to do with the elastotic degeneration seen in all collagen tissues and advanced glaucomatous neuropathy. You can see that she just has a little bit of field left with the 10-2 and obvious pseudo-exfoliation. So sometimes an Ologen may be preferable than MMC. We find the 12 mm Ologen too large, so we take the advantage of using it in 2 patients, and this is cut in half and push posteriorly over the scleral flap apex. If it's too anterior, then you might impede flow and you'll have very high pressures later. So it goes behind, and remember the scleral flap sutures have to be loose to allow the fluid to percolate. So this is, I thought it's nice to just show it over time. This is POD1. This is at week 7. Remember, they always look very, very congested with an Ologen, and you need to write it in red on the card and the file to avoid another injection point of view, because we've seen that if it sequesters, then it causes more trouble. It looks like a Tenon cyst, so unless you write it's Ologen, people may not know, those who are following enough, it's not you. So this is what, very much like a Tenon cyst, but this is actually Ologen. And over a period of time, this is 1 year, and this is at 18 months, and the pressures remain all right. So they say that Ologen is supposed to disappear in 3 months' time. I often see them very, very often. So I quite think that it is never ending. So I think I'll stop here for surgical pearls. Thank you very much for having me here with this short presentation. I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Madam, do you routinely do trap first, half thickness flap, and then shift and do the cataract surgery like that? Or?
Yes, I always make the scleral flap in a turgid eye, because if we do the phaco first, often the eye becomes very floppy,
soft.
And I find it very difficult to form the. So I just do the scleral flap, change it, go do the phaco, and then come back and complete the trap.
Yes. Correct. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Abhijit Dada. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Vyas sir. Good afternoon, Mayuri ma'am. Good afternoon, Medha ma'am. Sushmita ma'am, thank you. I have had the opportunity to be in Chandigarh with her, and her patients love her, and they literally, the children hug her. So I have had the opportunity to see the work that she does so many times, because we go to each other for exams.
So good to see you, Ragini ma'am, after so long. Hello.
Yeah, I know we have stopped meeting, and I'm sorry to interrupt the session, but I really wanted to say hello and thank you to all of you, Amit and Vyas sir and Medha ma'am and everybody. Sorry, Abhijit Dada, to interrupt, but
No,
I
it's
just
okay,
couldn't keep quiet. Mayuri ma'am, sorry, we had messed up with our topics, but we corrected ourselves. Thank you for reminding us. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye, Lagu.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity again, ma'am.
So,
Thank you, Ragini.
No.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sushmita and Mayuri ma'am. Thank you. Vyas sir, pranam, and sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
So we can start with Dr. Vyas' topic.
Yes.
Because he has again to attend another conference. So
Abhijit, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, sure, sir, it's there. So in 1 minute only, I will introduce Dr.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, your screen is visible, sir. Yes, it's visible. So Dr. Pradeep Vyas is a leading glaucoma and cataract expert in our country. He's a very good academician, a very nice orator, and a very humble human being. For us, he's like a big brother always. So many years I see him, and he has not changed a bit. So we have a lot of respect for you, sir. So I request you to start with your talk, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Abhijit, for your kind introduction. And I would, and everyone knows that, this topic cannot be covered in 8 minutes to that. And before I start talking on this topic, I would like to thank MOS for having given me this opportunity. My screen is okay. So
sir,
when
before
I think
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is there some signal kind of problem?
Yes,
Because
hello?
your voice is getting
Your
cracked all the
voice
time.
is-
Yes.
Cracking. It's getting cracked. Yeah, it's getting cracked.
No. Okay, the photo is not there.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually,
No,
I'm
audible,
on a
sir.
hot
Yeah,
spot.
audible.
I'm on the hot spot. So if I switch on my video, then there will be a problem. Okay. So
Okay.
when I think of the approaches of the patient, I will take
Thanks,
into
Shopee.
account. One is, yes. Yes, Mayuri. Hello.
Put on
No,
slideshow.
you start, sir. You can start.
You can't see my slide.
No, we are seeing, sir.
Pradeep, we can see your slides. Go on slideshow.
And go for slideshow.
You can see.
You can go for
I'm on the
slideshow.
So
Okay, sir.
yes, now you are on slideshow.
I'm on the slideshow. I'm on the slideshow.
Now,
it is-
yeah,
now
is
it
it
is
right?
okay. Now it
Our
is.
slideshow. Yes. Yes. Sir.
Okay. So when I think of the combined surgery, then what all things comes in my mind? What is the diagnosis of the patient? So whether it's a normal tension glaucoma, whether it's a primary open angle glaucoma, whether it's a mild, moderate, and if an angle closer, then it's an angle closer suspect. There's any other secondary form of glaucoma. So what are the options I would have? I can go ahead and just do the cataract surgery and believe and commonly performed anti-glaucoma surgery. Don't ask me why. The answer is very simple. Then just by doing the cataract surgery, you can bring down the intraocular pressure in each and every patient from 1 millimeter to 8 millimeter, depending upon the condition. If patient is having ocular hypertension, if patient has an angle closer disease, then again the pressure can go down to 6 to 8 millimeter. IOP reduction of around 1 to 3 millimeter just by doing the cataract surgery only. So when I would do just the anti-glaucoma surgery alone, if the patient has a normal tension glaucoma where you want aggressive lowering of the IOP, always you want to see the patient should have a IOP in the single digit. And if the patient has a very advanced primary open angle glaucoma and the amount of just anti-glaucoma surgery alone. Now the combined surgery. So most of the patient category of a combined surgery, they are the primary open angle glaucoma, exfoliation, pigmentary, so on, so forth. Occasionally, we do a combined surgery where we put the Ahmed glaucoma valve implant or any other valve along with the cataract surgery and having undergone a VR procedure, or if the patient has a cataract and having a neovascular glaucoma. The combined surgery now becoming most popular, particularly in the Western world, India as well, that is the MIGS cataract, right? Where we put, obviously the surgery is pretty expensive. There is a steep learning curve. Surgery could be the micro pulse laser. I obviously don't do that. And it is commonly used in a neovascular glaucoma with cataract or a chronic and along with the phaco that is reserved for those patients who has a chronic angle 60-degree closer with cataract. And then the trabeculectomy followed by the cataract extraction, or first the cataract extraction trabeculectomy. So what are the situation? You are seeing this where we would preferably do first the anti-glaucoma surgery, because in such an advanced case, you cannot achieve a good IOP lowering by doing the combined extraction. And in this kind of a patient who has progressed over almost 6 to 7 years time with this much, and probably the patient is willing to put 1 or 2 drops in his eyes, then you would like to do just a cataract surgery alone. So that depends upon that amount of cataract, damaging IOP, target IOP, and type and the stage of the glaucoma. In this type of a patient, obviously you would like to do just the glaucoma surgery and then subsequently cataract surgery. And in this kind of a glaucoma, you would like to do just a cataract surgery alone. So where the way you would like to do the cataract surgery alone is the ocular hypertension, angle closure disease, and the lens-induced glaucoma. All lens-induced glaucoma, just go ahead and do the cataract surgery only. And if they have a advanced glaucomatous defect, then you can die and there is a risk of failure of trabeculectomy. So IOP changes after the phacoemulsification. As I said earlier, it varies from 1 to 8 millimeter of mercury. And in angle closure disease, that is the most important thing, because it's a morphological disease. And once you remove the lens, then you see that the angle. So phacotrabeculectomy is one of the most commonly performed combined procedure. It eliminates the risk of two surgery, prevent early postoperative spikes, and faster visual rehabilitation, and that includes the secondary glaucomas as well. And if patient cannot come to you for a repeated examination, then go ahead and do the combined surgery. Some important pre and post-operative consideration. There is no need to discontinue any PG analog. The people have started talking of the role of ROCK inhibitor in scientific evidence that yes, it's surgery. Anti-metabolite is yes commonly used, and even I would post-operative use of topical steroid use tips. Don't try to attempt this surgery in a topical anastomy, particularly in POAG and NTG patient. And atropine usually is not needed. The blade should be as much, as like you do with the trabeculectomy, and avoid putting the toric and the multifocal IOLs. Lifetime follow-up is required, and more as compared to the combined surgery. Sequential surgery, yes, it's preferred method. You do a trabeculectomy first in advanced glaucoma, and then you do the cataract surgery. Sequential surgery where you do the cataract first, and then you feel the most important indication is that the failed trabeculectomy, the eye syndrome, and the chronic angle closure glaucoma, where you require to do another surgery, where you may be able to put the AGVs as well. The MIGS with the combined surgery, I have never done it, but I'm looking forward to do it in a very near future, where you put the eye stent or eye stent inject and you do a cataract surgery. It requires a steep learning curve. So there are lots of complications associated with the combined surgery, and that is what almost similar to what you have along with the trabeculectomy. So in summary, the phacoemulsification alone gives the modest IOP control and can be considered in some of the condition what we have discussed. Phacotrabeculectomy seems to be a safe and the fast causes do a fast visual rehabilitation and acceptable long-term IOP condues of antimetabolites. MIGS with phacoemulsification is getting popular in Western world, and probably it may come to India soon. I don't know about the situation. Thank you very much for your patience hearing. Yes, Abhijit.
No questions, sir. No, not from my side.
The next, introduce the next speaker.
Dr. Manish Singh, are you online?
He's
Yeah,
there.
I'm there.
Yeah. So, Dr. Manish Singh, he's a glaucoma and cataract surgeon. He's practicing in Netralayam in Kolkata. So he'll be sharing his views on step-by-step glaucoma shunt surgery.
Thank you so much,
Doctor,
Dr.
please
Abhijit.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot for this opportunity. So next 7 to 8 minutes, I'll be just share a few practical tips about glaucoma shunt surgery. The commonly available shunts, as we all know, is the valved and the non-valved implant. In India, these are the two implants which are currently available. One is the Ahmed valve, which is the valved one, and the Oral Lab is non-valved. No financial interest, but personally, I believe if you're starting shunt surgery, you have not done it, maybe starting with a valved implant may be a little easier because the learning curve is less and you tend to have less hypotony related complications. And over time, you should also start doing non-valved implants because they do have their advantages, and the cost is again a very big advantage with a non-valved implant. The right indication also is very important. Mostly we do shunts in patients with scarred conjunctiva, patient where already we have failed TRAB or where we think the TRAB has a poor success rate, like a neovascular glaucoma or a uveitic glaucoma or eye syndrome post RD surgery. But if you're starting shunt surgery, again, try to have a patient where the conjunctiva is good. There is not too many surgeries have been done, so the mobility of the conjunctiva is good. So maybe a pseudophakic glaucoma or a aphakic glaucoma can be a good option to start with. But over time, you will realize that certain patients, like for example, patients with an extensive anomaly or eye syndrome, even uveitic, chronic uveitis, neovascular glaucomas, and shunt patients, in these cases, definitely glaucoma shunts do better than a trabeculectomy. So there are very good indications for doing a shunt surgery. You also need to understand the tool which you are using. Among Ahmed valve, the most common one which is used is the FP7 model. But in certain cases, especially in smaller eyes or in pediatric patients where you feel it's too big, these cases you can go for the FP8 model, which is much smaller compared to FP8. Also, whenever you're doing inferior surgery, for example, sometimes we have already done a supratemporal surgery, you want to go inferonasally where there is a space crunch. These cases, I often use the FP8 model. So choosing the right model is also important for your patient. I'll just share this practical example so that we can discuss the steps of the surgery. This is a young boy who had Axenfeld anomaly, already had a TRAB done, which was failed. The left other eye was lost, and this eye had a very advanced cupping with 28 millimeter mercury pressure on 4 medication. It is already a failed TRAB, and plus patient had Axenfeld. So we thought we should straight away go with the Ahmed valve implantation. These are some steps of the surgery. The various ways you can dissect the conjunctiva, you can go for a fornix-based flap, you can go for a limbal-based flap. In this case, we are planning to go for limbal-based flap, so the dissection will be done 2 to 3 millimeters behind the limbus, so that we can have a conjunctiva to conjunctival suturing. In this case, we have ballooned the conjunctiva. You can do it with a lignocare or a saline, which helps you in dissection of the tissue. When you're dissecting, first you dissect anteriorly till the limbus, and then you create the posterior pocket for placement of the plate. We need to prime the valve. You see the flow of fluid coming out from here. In case you see that when you're injecting the fluid is not coming out, then most likely the tip is blocked or the valve is malfunctioning. In this case, you should use another implant. Suturing is again very important. Suturing should be done at least 8 millimeters behind the limbus. If you're suturing it too close, this can lead to higher risk of plate erosion. So you should always be suturing at the correct distance. Cut the tube, insert the tube in a way that at least 2 to 3 millimeters of tube is inside the limbus. Try to keep the tube as away from cornea as possible. Even if it touches the iris, you can have some inflammation. But if it touches the cornea, you can have bad corneal decompensation. So try to keep the tube as away from cornea as possible. Once you've secured the tube, cover it, suture it with a 9-0 nylon suture, and then you can cover it with a scleral patch graft or corneal graft, whatever is available with you. And after that, the conjunctiva is sutured in this case with a 8-0 Vicryl suture with a round body needle. There can be some modifications, but this is a basic technique which we follow in our patient. But those cases where the patient has already had a pars plana vitrectomy, in this case, going through pars plana route into the vitreous cavity is a very good idea, because there you are far away from the cornea, so chances of corneal complications are almost nil. You can use a pars plana clip, or you can use a normal FP7 or FP8. Also, this was a post PK case. Here also, a pars plana option is very good, but the patient should have a proper pars plana vitrectomy done. Coming to the Orolab aqueous implant, it is much cheaper compared to the walled implant. Plus, the advantage is being non-walled. Although initially it will not function, it will take at least a month. When the suture tie will dissolve, then it will start functioning. But once it starts functioning, it gives you a very good IP control. Plus, the hypertensive phase is much less in the non-walled implant compared to a walled implant. But this is a much bigger implant, and definitely it has got more learning curve. We need to dissect the muscles and need to keep the wings of the implant underneath the muscle. So that definitely needs the dissection of the muscle. Like in this case, we are dissecting and clipping it underneath the superior rectus and temporal and lateral rectus. You can see the wings have been put. Then you suture the eyelid using the 8-zone nylon suture, 8 millimeter behind the limbus. After you have done that, the most important thing is to occlude the tube using a 7-0 or a 6-0 Vicryl suture and inject fluid from the end of the tube to ensure that it is completely occluded. If it is not occluded, it can lead to a very bad hypotomy, because these patients, as we know, don't have any wall. After you have inserted the tube, the rest of the procedure is similar. It's a small step I'd like to show about the venting. Once you've occluded the tube, you can see we checking the tube is completely occluded. We have put the tube inside, and after that you can see we are putting some venting slits, because in this case what happens is the tube shunt will not work for at least 1 month as long as the Vicryl suture is there, and once the suture gets absorbed, the tube will start working. So that is why when you put the venting slit, it causes a bit of egress of aqueous from that area and helps to control your intraocular pressure. We can often combine a cataract surgery also with shunt surgery. Mostly we do the cataract surgery and then do shunt surgery in the same sitting. But in case of pediatric eye, since we need to do a vitrectomy, eye becomes very soft. So what we do, we first put the plate, we secure the plate, then we complete the cataract surgery, we do the vitrectomy, we put the lens, and then we complete the glaucoma surgery. So in this case, we do a slight modification. I'll just run through the common complication. Tube erosion is a very common complication if the tube is not properly covered. Long-term corneal decompensation, again, is a common complication. So very important you to keep the tube as away from cornea as possible. This is another common complication, Ahmed glaucoma, that is a Tennant cyst. So this is commonly seen in the hypertensive phase. So nowadays, whenever the pressure in post-operative period is 10 or above, we start aqueous suppression, which definitely reduces the chances of Tennant cyst formation. If you're going inferiorly, I always believe we should go infero-nasally because it is cosmetically better. This is an infero-temporally done AGV. You can see half of the bleb is exposed and it looks very bad cosmetically. So this is all I wanted to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Hello.
Yeah.
It was very nice presentation. And basically, I am doing a lot of cases, AGV cases. But what I have come across is, as you said, tube erosion is very common. And another thing, conjunctiva is not healthy in so many patients because long-standing glaucoma, as you said, neovascular they have, plus pseudophakic glaucoma or secondary glaucomas. So conjunctiva is not healthy at all in such patients. So in my experience, I have come across exposure of the implant also. So conjunctival grafting, autografting is I am trying in some patients, or at the time of surgery also, as to avoid the tube erosion or movement of the tube, or the movement of the tube, as you said, a slight movement afterwards, it may keep the valve not in the position and it may touch the cornea. So what we are modifying, what I am basically modifying is making a scleral tunnel both sides and making a trap door and covering the tube just like scleral gap. So what do you think? Because post-op complications are very much on table, everything is fine, but after 6 months or a year. So that's what I wanted to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think making a scleral tunnel and covering it with the tube definitely will help. You have mentioned that the health of conjunctiva is also very important. So a lot of these patients where we see it's a badly scarred conjunctiva, we often give oral doxycycline for 2 weeks. That definitely helps you in improving the conjunctiva health, and it helps you in healing also. Also very important is surgery should be done meticulously. Every step should be given importance. You have to actually measure what is the size of the tube, whether you're putting it perfectly or not, what is the distance of the plate from the limbus. If you do it meticulously, the chances of complication will be less, but we need to be vigilant, because whenever there is a complication, you have to be actively intervene, because you can end up in losing the eye also at times.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you. So should I go for next talk? Dr. Amit, are you online?
Yes.
Dr. Amit Porwal, again, he's contemporary of my age, and he has done so nicely in All India level and our GSI level. So he has become a big figure at a young age, and he is a very keen academician. He is a very nice presenter, and he is a very good teacher, basically. He loves to teach. So we have a great orator and a teacher with us now. Amit, go ahead.
Thank you, Abhijit. I hope I'm audible and visible. Hello?
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this warm introduction. So today I'm going to talk on role of newer tonometers. So we all know that Goldmann application tonometer is considered as a gold standard, which is time tested and is reproducible. But in recent years, strong concerns have been raised. So what was the need for these newer devices to arise? So basically, it was to obtain an IOP measurement in children, bedridden, and uncooperative patients easily, obtain an IOP reading that is independent of the corneal factors, and to see whether the biomechanical factors, which is the corneal biomechanical factors, are of potential significance in the development of glaucoma. And these all questions have been answered and overcome by the newer generation of instruments, namely to mention a few, the ORA, DCT, and the iCare. So what are these instruments? Let us look at it one by one. I'm not going to go too much in detail, but just give an overview of these newer tonometers and what is their role in our current practice. So coming to the DCT, that is a dynamic contour tonometry, it is a straight line mount based. It measures and continuously and accurately measures the IOP. There is minimal corneal distortion. It is less affected by the corneal biomechanics and central corneal thickness. It is accurate in eyes with thin cornea, post-LASIK and basic surgery. It is based on the Pascal's principles, which states that the pressure applied to an enclosed fluid is transmitted undiminished to every part of the fluid system. And when applied to the cornea, it thoroughly places the cornea in neutral shape. At this point, the pressure on the inner surface of the cornea equals to that of the external surface of the cornea, and that shows the intraocular pressure. It has a piezoelectric pressure sensor which generates an electrical signal that is proportional to the IOP and to an audio signal. An audible feedback indicates a proper eye contact, and it takes about 100 measurements per second, and it reports the average diastolic IOP and the ocular pulse amplitude. It also generates a quality score from Q1 to Q5, where Q1 is a good measurement and Q5 bad measurement. So you also know whether the measurement is accurate or no, but looking at this quality score. The main drawback, it is more time consuming. It takes about 5 to 8 seconds more than that. It requires patient cooperation, local anesthetic drop. There is a learning curve involved when you are measuring IOP with this tonometer. It's a very expensive tool. It doesn't seem as useful in disease cornea or after corneal transplant. So when I looked at the literature search of studies involving DCT, it more accurately reflected the true IOP as accorded to binometry than GAD. DCT showed correlation with GAD with mild overestimation, and the DCT IOP is affected by corneal curvature and is less dependent on CCT than GAD. It also provides the ocular pulse amplitude, which is a surrogate measure of the optic nerve head perfusion status. Coming to the next tonometer, the ocular response analyzer is a non-contact, uses epoch operation principle. In this, the cornea undergoes a bidirectional operation and uses a pulse of approximately 10 milliseconds. These instruments record both the onward operation and the backward operation. You can see in this diagram the picture of the machine and the principle on which it is based on. So results consisting of these characteristic curves are instantly displayed on a graphic plot. Now, what are these graphic plot? I'll go in details. It measures 4 variables, the 2 indices of corneal physical properties and 2 measures of the IOP. So what are the corneal physical properties? You have the corneal hysteresis, a unique measurement of biomechanics of cornea, which is measured in millimeters of mercury and is shown to correlate weakly with the central corneal thickness. It also gives the corneal resistance factor, which is strongly linked to the CCT. The IOP measurements are, it measures the Goldman correlated IOP and also the corneal compensated IOP. This machine has incorporated with 20 megahertz ultrasonic tachymeter to measure the corneal thickness. It measures the corneal compensated IOP, which is a new IOP measurement, which is de-subjective to the corneal properties. Corneal hysteresis, which I mentioned, it measures the viscous damping of the cornea. It provides a new indicator for disease diagnosis and management. Corneal resistance factor is the total overall viscoelastic response to the cornea, and the Goldman correlated IOP, the traditional IOP measurement for historical reference. And when we look at the summaries of ORA, they have conflicting results. ORA provides an IOP reading that compensates for the corneal factors. The ORA IOP reading overestimates the CAT IOP, and the ORA IOP measurements were not independent of the CCT. We have the Richard 7CR, which is basically based on similar to ORA, but only these two parameters are measured with this tonometer with this particular machine. That is, you have the Goldman compensated IOP, Goldman correlated IOP, and the corneal response technology, that is the corneal compensated IOP. Coming to Corby's ST, again, is the non-contact mechanism is not fully established or published, but it records a dynamic reaction to the cornea to a defined air pulse using a high-speed Schindler camera, which takes out 4,300 images per second. A video of the 140 images taken within 31 milliseconds after the onset of the air pulse is displayed on an integral scheme, and it evaluates the corneal biometric response, biometry, tonometry, and pachymetry. So this particular machine measures lot of variables are measured, and if you see the video, video is really available on the YouTube. You can see how the corneal biometry responds. The moment the air puff hits the cornea, how the cornea undergoes the bidirectional movement is very nicely visible with this particular machine. So coming to biometric response measurement, it has the deformation amplitude, the applanation length, corneal velocity, IOP measurement, corneal thickness, Schindler images of the first and second applanation of the highest contour of the cornea, and a slow motion video of the corneal deformation after the air pulse. This is very dramatic, very nice slow motion video which is visible. So these are the parameters which are measured and how they are displayed on the screen. So coming to the IOP and pachymetry, it also measures the IOP, that is arrangement of corneal mechanical properties. Up to 6 measurements can be taken and the average IOP is displayed. The IOP measurements can be corrected with the aid of pachymetry-based correction table. There is an inbuilt Dresden correction table in this machine, and it gives precise measurements of the corneal thickness. So these are the various parameters how they are displayed on the screen, and this is how the cornea highest concavity of the cornea when it is reached, the picture is displayed. So coming to the summary, it has a high correlation, good agreement between the Corbis and the other instruments, especially the GAT and the RBT. It is well suited for situations where therapeutic contact lenses are applied, such as after laser refractive surgery. Corbis IOP was higher than IOP CC, and the Corbis parameter showed poor correlation corneal stresses and the correlation factor obtained by the ORA measurements. This considerable variation in the repeatability and reproducibility with this machine. The highest concavity rated parameter showed significant age dependency, and the CST offers higher IOP values and other tonometry techniques like the CAT or the ORA in post-LASIK patients. Coming to the Revon tonometer is approved for medical use in 2003. It's a portable handheld tonometer. It is gaining more and more acceptance, especially in our country. There are various models available. It does not require any topical anesthetic. It uses a disposable rod flow, which has a plastic tip to minimize the corneal injury, and chassis of oxygen are reduced. It is based on the impact induction principle, which records the IOP by measuring the deceleration of the magnetized rod probe in electromagnetic field on the Revon of the cornea, and this deceleration speed correlates with the IOP. The tip collides with the cornea at a very low speed over a few milliseconds, and the force applied is so minimal that it does not even elicit a blink response. So it is suitable for patients in pediatrics, age group, patients with disability, and for reading at home. It gives a rapid and consistent reading with minimal training. The feasibility of taking IOP measurements at different corneal locations, especially in altered corneas, and that is not possible. That is a major advantage. Correlates well with GAT, however, an average higher readings than GAT, say about by mean 1.34 millimeter higher than the GAT reading. There is insignificant correlation with CCT, but significant correlation with the corneal stresses and resistance factor. The next in the pipeline available is the transfocal diaphragm tonometer. It measures the deceleration of the rod as it hits the upper eyelid, which is based on the diagnostic principle. A digital readout is displayed on the screen. Does not require any anesthesia or sterilization. This is for pediatric cases and bedside measurements or home tonometry. But cases with corneal pathology and post-corneal surgery also it can be used. Main drawback being there is a drastic deviation from the GAT IOP for the measurement errors. The accuracy is still questionable and leads scar image or the faulty measurements. Then you have the Sensimed triggerfish, basically disposable silicone contact lens micro sensor. It automated readings of continuous ocular dimensional changes over 24 hours. It records for 30 seconds at 5 minutes interval over 24 hours, revealing radio IOP peak and patterns over one whole day and night. So an adhesive antenna is placed around the eye, which transmits the data to a portable recorder, which is thereafter transferred by Bluetooth to a software installed in the practitioner's computer. Next measurement machine is a Provio phosphine tonometer, which is markedly used for home tonometry. The device is pressed against this partially closed eyelid until you see a visual phenomenon. This is called a pressure phosphine, that is a dark circle with a ring of light around the outer circumference. This pressure phosphine is created with this tonometer, and the force applied to create this with the IOP. It is portable, does not require topical anesthetic, can be well performed. So when we look at the summary of various studies, the instrument accuracy based on assumption that I have to related to force needed to correct the cosmic force has been questioned. Is poor agreement between this and the CAT, and it's significantly less anxiety regarding the glaucoma than patients who do not have home tonometer. So when we come at all these tonometers, you have to pick up your purpose. Like iCare is good in pediatric age group, home tonometry, supine screening and ultracorneas. DCT is good in thin corneas, post-classical LASIK and PRK surgery. ORA for assessing the corneal hysteresis. Tonopathy possibly useful in ultracorneal using correlation formulas. When you want to consider for a tonometer in the operation theater, you can consider iCare, Tonopen, Perkins. When you want to use screening, iCare, Tonopen, Tonopan-P and transfocal tonometers can be used. NCT was used as a good screening tool. It's still being used. But when you compare NCT and iCare, iCare has gained more popularity because of the accuracy towards the GAT. So to conclude, the key to accurate screening for glaucoma in the future will be provided by battery of tests, including the measurement of IOP-CC, corneal CCT, and the ocular pulse amplitude. So there are various tonometers available. The journey is still going on. So you choose up what suits your practice and what is your purpose for what you're looking for a second instrument after CAT. So all these newer tonometers are good only when you have CAT and you want to buy one more tonometer after CAT, then you choose any one of them. Thank you.
Amit.
Yeah.
Hello. As a glaucoma expert, GAT is the first choice, but what is the second choice?
See, that's what I told you. As a glaucoma expert, GAT is the first choice which we need.
No, that's
As the second choice, I would go for a ribbon tonometer. I have a ribbon tonometer, I have an NCT. So I did a comparison of all these three tonometers also. So I think a ribbon tonometer is much more helpful and useful in anybody's practice than going for any of these fancy videos, looking at the cost and the type of practice which we are having. An institute practice with good amount of refractive unit, then you can go for ORA DCT because this machine is a huge investment. So if you don't want to invest much, you have a GAT and you're looking for another tonometer, especially which you can take to the OR, can take for camps, can go for screening. There was a time when NCT was used, but NCT always overestimates IOP and it's not good at all. iCare is a better substitute and practicality and feasibility is much better with this. So I would go for an iCare.
Yes. Thank you. That's what I want. Yes, thank you. Any other questions? So can go for Dr. Medha's talk now. So Medha Prabhu Desai is a glaucomatologist. She is practicing in Pune and she is also a very good academician and she has a knack in presentation and documentation. She has a huge collection of fundus photographs and she has published and authored a book also. So I hand over the dais to the mic to Dr. Medha Prabhu Desai.
Thank you, Dr. Abhijit. My slides are visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, I'll start my talk. I'm going to talk on dilemmas in OCT. We all know that OCT is an investigation and it is not a diagnostic tool. Hence, clinical correlation is mandatory. There is need to understand advantages and potential pitfalls of this technology. Mandatory knowledge is there before interpreting any OCT is you should know how a normal ONH looks like and what is the variation, relevant features of glaucomatous optic neuropathy, how to correlate with OCT findings, and there are some outliers obviously where OCT will not help at all. So OCT can detect neuroretinal thinning, RNFL thinning. There are clues for physiologic variation and statistical progression is also possible. But OCT cannot detect vascular signs or pallor of cup of neuroretinal rim. So any OCT you are presented with, whether it is done at your place or some referral or some any other patient who has done elsewhere, you should see, is this really glaucoma? If a patient presents like this, that the right eye has a definite signs of glaucoma, left eye also the CD looks high. So if you correlate this with OCT, there is RNFL thinning and RGC thinning in the right eye, left eye appears normal, and even the perimetry is normal. So if you consider all these points together, you can then say that, okay, this patient has advanced glaucoma, which was in a pseudoexfoliation glaucoma. Now look at this patient, a physician diagnosed POAG on 2 molecules, pressures were 20. And if you look at the test, she has moderate myopia. There is RNFL RGC thinning, but whether this is glaucoma or not, You can see the translation of the fundus also. And the most important is that the discs are tilted. So this patient has moderate myopia, tilted disc along with posterior polar cataracts. So all these are contributing towards her RNFL, RGC thinning or GCC++ thinning which we are seeing here. So this you need to observe this. So OCT analysis is an analysis of RNFL and RGC. This is a statistical analysis. And because it studies the optic nerve head, which has a wide variation in our population, it is affected by media, cornea, and cataract, neurological disorders, and also vascular disorders. So there are certain artifacts also during acquisition. The scan quality will affect the OCT performance. The effect is greater on retinal nerve fiber layer than ONH and GCC. So if there is low signal strength, obviously you cannot see this OCT scan. Blink and artifacts can be there, and if they are in the circle, you should know that it should not be interpreted. If they are outside the circle, it is okay to interpret to some extent. This decentration obviously needs to take a repeat, do a repeat scan. There are microseconds or some eye movements also, they can affect the quality of your scan. There are some ocular confounders which can cause underestimation of RNFL and GCC, and mainly media opacities, cornea as well as cataract, and some vascular occlusions post laser. This show that there is thinning of cataract. Even the perimetry defect would be the same. So this is a definitely area where you have to look for. Other ocular confounders can give rise to overestimation of RNFL, and these are PDR, diabetic maculopathies, or any epiretinal membrane which is near the optic nerve. So myopia definitely gives erroneous diagnosis of glaucoma because RNFL and GCC thinning is seen in glaucoma in OCT scan, and myopia above -12 and myopia above -23. If there is posterior staphyloма, peripapillary atrophy, definitely you cannot consider these scans are good for glaucoma diagnosis. Tilted disc, again, there is a temporal shift of superior temporal and inferior temporal bundles, and there is a different distribution than the normative database. So here you can see something like an RNFL thinning here, and needs to be interpreted very, very carefully. Now, if you see this analysis, the RNFL average is totally normal. But if you see here, there are some red pixels over here. And now if you look carefully, there is a RNFL defect which corresponds with the visual field defect. So this also needs to be taken into consideration, and don't just look at the average figures, but look at the sectoral thinning also. Again, another similar patient, the average RNFL is totally normal. There is some RNFL thinning over here, but here ONH right and left both show RNFL thinning in even the photographs, the perimetry, and now OCT, if you correlate, there is a focal change which is masked by the global parameters. So this should be looked after. ONH size, obviously, if there is a disc size is large, the RNFL is thick, and they have a lower sensitivity for early glaucoma and can be some false negatives also. Smaller disc size, the RNFL is thin, and there is increased risk of false positive results into consideration. RNFL decreases at a faster rate in glaucoma size as compared to normalized because it is proportional to the baseline RNFL. So thinner the RNFL, there is lower rate of change, and thicker RNFL, the rate of change would be higher. So this also should be kept into mind. RNFL thickness rarely falls below 40. So this is because of the residual glial or non-neural tissue. Hence, in advanced cases, it is difficult to see progression or even interpret this glaucomas only based on OCTs. And these fields are more useful to judge. Fields are more important for here to see the progression. Because it is a nerve, you have to see and you have to know there are some neurological disorders, and you should know all these disorders and see how they are affecting the OCT. Now, this is a patient, right eye is showing altitudinal defect, RNFL thinning is there, but if you see there is a obliteration of the cup here, even the cup here is like 0.12 or 0.29, left eye perimetry is not possible. So based on this, if you diagnose this as glaucoma, definitely you are totally in error. And here, if you look at the optic disc, it is an anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. Similarly, a patient of narrow angle glaucoma came for second opinion for intermittent blurring of vision. Gonioscopy showed, even the ASOCT showed the narrow angles. And here you can see the rim pallor is much more than the cupping in both the eyes, and the perimetry and OCT report. Both these are thinning, the perimeter is not matching, and all these are like not conclusive of patient having glaucoma. And hence we did MRI brain, and you can see that the patient had chronic microvascular ischemic changes with generalized cerebral atrophy. Multiple things were going on. So this is typically not a glaucoma patients. Another patient, again, a patient was on anti-glaucoma medications for 12 years, open angle glaucoma. Visual field was done 12 years back. It was not repeated at all. And OCT showed some defects over here, and hence that's why he was started on glaucoma medication. So, but when we did perimetry, it showed a paracentral vertical congruous defect, and hence MRI was advised, which showed an old infarct at the posterior tip of right occipital cortex. So these patients might be hammering something else also, which you have to look after. Another patient, a patient diagnosed as normal tension glaucoma, angle was open, but she had rapid progressive loss, and the visual fields were like this. There was RNFL and RGC thinning, but all these things were not matching. So we ordered an MRI, and patient had a lesion in the pituitary area suggestive of adenoma or meningioma. Patient underwent surgery, and she was diagnosed to have a suprasellar atypical meningioma. So these cases can have something different, which will be shown on OCT as RNFL thinning or RGC thinning, but we have to keep our mind and options open to say whether this is glaucoma or not. Obviously, we don't have to miss the macula, because even if advanced glaucoma patient, something else might be going on, and the advancement might not be because of the progression of the glaucoma, but because of the development of the pseudocyst. So always ask yourself, is this really glaucoma? Watch out for media opacities and segmentation errors. Analyze the entire report and not just numbers or colors. Look for a focal change and not an averaging numbers. Identify errors, artifacts, and reasons behind it. Account for myopia and other any comorbid conditions if there are there. Always do a detailed retinal evaluation along with OCT macula, and always correlate with visual fields and optic nerve head findings. So thank you for your patient hearing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are.
Nodi? Hey, Nodi.
Abhijit, over to you.
Yeah.
Mayuri ma'am, I think Abhijit is connecting. Till then, you can have some discussion. We are running late actually. The session is late. We have one more talk left, and other session people are already. Meda, it was excellent talk. Lot of good tips for beginners. And this is very important. OCT can't be a substitute, but how to read an OCT and what is the importance of OCT is very well told.
Abhijit is there.
Yeah, he's there. He's logged in.
Yeah, is visible?
Yeah, yes, you are audible and visible, Abhijit.
Yeah. So should I start?
Yes, please.
So yeah, thank you everybody. So after Meda's talk on OCT in glaucoma, now I will be talking on anti-segment OCT in the management of glaucoma.
You need to go to slideshow.
Yeah. Okay. Nodi hoina idale. Yes.
Move.
It's not.
It's not moving.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Abhijit, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I am audible. No? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I am using this Topcon model of OCT for my anti-segment OCT, because Zeiss model also I tried, but somehow I found it cumbersome. So I am comfortable with this. My slides are not going forward. I don't know why.
You can leave the slideshow.
The slides are
And come back.
naughty. So OCT is the most sensitive and promising diagnostic technique to analyze the anti-segment structures. So it actually combines the pulses of light reflected by the tissues of the eye. And we started with time domain OCT, where the movement of the mirror enabled to take the scans, which is called a single coherent light, and it was called an A scan. And the maximum rate can scan now is about 17,000 A scans. It provides a one-dimensional measurement processed into 2 dimensions, calling it a B scan. So it gives actually a tomogram, giving a actually 3D picture. So the newer advantage is a spectral domain OCT, in which the image capture is analyzed by the 2 different reflected spectrum beams, and it gives us a very accurate image, and it is the imaging time. And it is attached with the fundus structures, and we can actually measure the iris and cornea angle in this spectral OCT, spectral domain OCT. So ASOCT is a reliable technique, is easy to perform, it's contact-free, it's pain-free, it has very short learning curve. And the most important thing is the images can be analyzed, quantified, compared with the latter images or the other images obtained. So anti-segment OCT, it actually gives us the antechamber structure, antechamber depth, angle to angle photograph, antechamber amplitude, pupillary diameter, and lens curvature. But friends, remember, it's not substitute to gonioscopy, but it's an complementary to gonioscopy. You have to confirm your findings with gonioscopic findings. So here in anti-segment OCT, we are submitted to the antechamber. So what is antechamber? Actually, it's the junction between iris root and the cornea. And first important anatomical landmark to evaluate the angle to see for the scleral spur, which is in between the posterior curvature of the cornea and the curvature of sclera. This is the landmark to be identified first. Trabecular meshwork and Stalway's line are located posterior to it. Once the scleral spur is identified, then the position of the iris related to the scleral spur is checked. If the iris is found to be posterior to the scleral spur, then we say the angle is open. And if the angle, if it is anterior, then we say angle is narrow. Also, we can use OCT to evaluate the functioning blebs, whether they are functioning or not, and the evaluation of the glaucoma drainage devices also. So here we can see whole of the angle can be seen in a single picture. Then, as I said, you can see the scleral spur first. It's a red dot is the scleral spur, and then about 500 microns away from it is the yellow dot, that is the trabecular meshwork. So you have to identify this angle first. So in routinely we get a picture like this. We measure the angle, the computer of the OCT, we can measure actually the angle of both the eyes. Here we can see it's a narrow angle. You can see the angle is almost 2 to 4 degrees. Here you can see the angle is closed. Then another clinical entity is a plateau iris, in which the iris profile is flat, which can be shown in the dotted red line, and the anterior rotation of the iris will push the iris root, and it will give the classical appearance of this plateau iris. So clinically, you can see this, and after doing YAG PI, you can see the angle opening is not much wider after doing YAG PI, even if the PI is patent. Then coming to the filtering blades, so commonly we get this kind of good blades in which there is a nice filtration. It's called a low bleb, or it's a low reflectivity of the conjunctiva. And ASOCT, we can see the picture like this. Then we get a good bleb, that is a high bleb or functioning blebs, in which you can see the sclerostomy and the bleb. Then you can see an encapsulated bleb, in which it's a cystic structure and the ostium is closed here. You can see the ostium is closed, it is not functioning. Then you can see a flat bleb. There is only opening seen here. There is only opening seen here, but the path is not there. The bleb is not visible. Then another application in glaucoma is the central corneal thickness. So here also the machine does everything. You have to just see on the cornea and the machine measures the corneal thickness. So here it calculates the corneal thickness as about 514 micron in the right eye and 447 in left eye. Like that, we actually measure the corneal thickness. Then pigment dispersion is another glaucoma which we can diagnose on OCT. The pigment dispersion glaucoma, as all of you know, there is a concave iris with underlying iris zonal structures causing miosis and mydriasis, which causes degranulation and dispersion of the pigments. And extensive close contact between iris and lens leads to the accumulation of aqueous humor in the antechamber and the pressure imbalance and iris concavity. This is called as the inverse pupillary block. So when we compare ASOCT with UBM, the advantages of ASOCT as it is a non-contacting, it has got a better resolution, limbus to limb views are obtained, it can be used in immediate postoperative period. But the disadvantages are we have limited experience, it has less penetration as compared to the UBM, ciliary body and retroidal structures are not visualized, and it cannot be used in opaque media like UBM. Thank you.
So thank you everyone finishing the session on time because we were given
Yes.
it late.
Yes, we were given 15 minutes late.
Yes. Okay. So happy Diwali, everybody.
Thank
Happy
you.
Diwali in advance.
Oh,
And hopefully we will meet next time. Next MOS we will meet physically and have a good
Yes.
interaction. Dr. Manish, thank you.
thank you all.